The Hoop Heads Podcast is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Hey Hoop Heads, I wanted to take a minute to shout out our partners and friends at Dr. Dish Basketball. Their Dr. Dish shooting machines are undoubtedly the most advanced and user-friendly machines on the market. Sign up now for their Virtual Camp 2.0 featuring 10 days of workouts with pro trainers from the Dr. Dish family. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com and follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Mention the Hoop Heads podcast and save an extra $300 on the Dr. Dish Rebel, All-Star, and CT models. Visit drdishbasketball.com for details. That's a great deal, Hoop Heads. Get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
Hi, this is Anthony Camara from the University of Alabama in Huntsville, and you're listening to the Hoop Heads podcast.
Prepare like the pros with the all-new Fast Draw and Fast Scout. Fast Draw has been the #1 play diagramming software for coaches for years. You'll quickly see why Fast Model Sports has the most compelling and intuitive basketball software out there. For a limited time, Fast Model is offering new subscribers 10% off Fast Draw and Fast Scout. Just use the code SAVE10 at checkout to grab your discount, and you'll be on your way to more efficient game prep and improved communication with your team. Fast Model also has new coaching content every week on its blog, plus play and drill diagrams on its play bank. Check out the links in the show notes for more. Fast Model Sports is the best in basketball.
The best coaches, what they attempt to do is just take away whatever they're strongest at. You're never going to take away 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if you can take away what they're best at, then I think your scouting report worked.
Paul O'Connor is the city director for Pro Skills Basketball in Columbus, Ohio. He's also an assistant boys basketball coach at Olentangy Orange High School in Lewis Center, Ohio. Paul pursued his passion for coaching in college by working with the Ohio University men's basketball team as a manager and video coordinator. After graduating from OU, he went on to Providence College as a graduate assistant coach. Paul also served as the director of ops at Central Connecticut State University and as an assistant coach at Kennesaw State University, before leaving the college ranks to become the Director of Business Development and Basketball for Kids in the Game, a youth sports program based in New York. If you're looking to improve your coaching, please consider joining the Hoop Heads Mentorship Program. We believe that having a mentor is the best way to maximize your potential and become a transformational coach. By matching you up with one of our experienced mentors, you'll develop a one-on-one relationship that will help your coaching, your team, your program, and your mindset. The Hoop Heads Mentorship Program delivers mentoring services to basketball coaches at all levels through our team of experienced head coaches. Find out more at hoopheadspod.com or shoot me an email directly, mike@hoopheadspod.com. Follow us on social media at hoopheadspod on Twitter and Instagram, and be sure to check out the Hoop Heads Podcast Network for more great basketball content. Grab your notebook as you listen to this episode with Paul O'Connor, Columbus City Director for Pro Skills Basketball. Hello and welcome to the Hoop Heads Podcast. It's Mike Linsing here without my co-host Jason Sunkel tonight, but I am pleased to be joined by the Columbus City Director for Pro Skills Basketball, Paul O'Connor. Paul, welcome to the Hoop Heads Pod.
Thanks so much, Mike. I appreciate you having me on. Looking forward to tonight.
Absolutely excited to have you on, get an opportunity to talk to you about all the different things that you've been able to do in the game. You've had an interesting career path through the game of basketball. I want to start, though, with a special event that you have coming up that you'd like to share with our audience of coaches, specifically coaches who may be listening in the Columbus, Ohio area, but certainly people can travel into the clinic. It's going to be a great one. So just give us an idea of what the clinic's all about, how people can get signed up for it, and then we'll jump into your story.
Yeah, for sure. So Pro Skills Basketball is a youth basketball organization that has a presence nationwide. Like you mentioned, I'm the Columbus City Director, and we're hosting a coaches clinic this summer, August 29th, down here in Columbus. We have coaches from Ohio State, Kent State, Xavier, Malone, and Eastern Kentucky coming to talk. It's going to be great. We plan to host these, this is our first one. We plan to host these moving forward. But really excited about it. Really good opportunity to kind of get a ton of coaches from across the state of Ohio together and just spend the day together, network, and learn a little bit. So super excited. You guys can register. You can go to proskillsbasketball.com and register, or you can go to any of our social channels, PSB Columbus on Instagram. The link is in there as well. Or you can email me, Paul, Paul, at proskillsbasketball.com, and we can get you signed up.
That's going to be great. I know that everything that Pro Skills does is done in a first-class way. We've had Brennan on twice, and we've had Logan on with us, the founders of Pro Skills Basketball, and everything that they do is done well from a youth basketball perspective. Every time I talk to those guys, whether on or off air, I always just tell them, hey, you guys are doing the right thing, and it's refreshing to see an organization that is trying to do all the things that I'm constantly trying to preach and talk to people about in terms of youth basketball. So if you get an opportunity to go and register, you're going to be in the Columbus area or you live in the Columbus area and you get a chance to go to the clinic, I would highly recommend signing up with Paul and Pro Skills Basketball. So that being said, we'll get into how you got connected to Pro Skills Basketball as we move our way through your journey. But let's go back in time to when you were a kid. Tell us a little bit about how you got into the game of basketball and what some of your first experiences were like with the game.
Yeah, man, I think I have a lot of, that traditional story that I think a lot of your listeners and probably former guests had, where I was just indoctrinated into it. I grew up in a basketball family. My father coached college basketball for 10 years. My uncle coached for 10 years. I have uncles that are refs. I have aunts that, have the most wins in New York State history and have it's just in our blood. I'm probably the least successful coach that we've ever had, so I got that going for me. But no, yeah, it was just in our family, in our DNA. We started playing at a very young age, and it probably went a little too far, to be honest, from a parent perspective, because I just quit all other sports. I couldn't do baseball. I had no interest in soccer. I didn't get into golf until way too late. And it was just basketball or bust for me, which is great. I mean, I loved it. Don't get me wrong. But, nowadays you want your kid to play a million different sports and get exposed to different things. And, it was basketball or nothing for me and my family growing up.
It's interesting because when we think about youth basketball today, and obviously things are starting to skew towards that specialization piece, and yet I think, like you just said, as a parent, one of the things that you try to do is to expose your kids to lots of different things in multiple sports and help them to figure out what they like and what they don't like. And yet there's so much pressure on kids. And this isn't just a basketball problem, but it's a soccer problem. It's a tennis problem. It's a golf problem. It's any sport that you want to name, that there's more and more pressure, whether it's from the perception of people out there, parents, coaches, that, hey, if I don't specialize early, I'm going to fall behind. So you have that. And then you also have, obviously, the business model where it's in the interest of a basketball business to keep kids playing basketball year round. And what I always tell people, and what I kind of believe, is that as long as whatever is being done at the direction of the child, then I think you're okay. Like if you're a kid who loves basketball, and I think back to myself, like I played everything up until I was about probably 10 or 11 was my last season of baseball. And from that point on, I was all basketball. But it wasn't my parents saying, hey, you got to drop these other sports if you want to be good at basketball. It was me saying, hey, I love basketball. This is what I want to do. And so it's interesting when you talk to somebody who had an experience that was similar, where it just became all basketball all the time. And it sounds like you were similar to me, where, yeah, you played all those other things, but ultimately basketball just became your passion. Everything else fell away. Is that kind of how it went for you? Was that how you describe it?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think you described it perfectly, where my parents put me in those other sports, but it just didn't last. It didn't stick. And I was always coming back to basketball. I was never practicing those other sports, which is probably why I quit, because baseball game would end and I would go play basketball. So I never really got good at anything else. And, my basketball career was pretty mediocre as well. So, I practiced, but, I think I maxed out my potential. That's for sure.
What did it look like? What did practice look like for you as like a middle school, high school kid? Were you playing pickup games, and where? Were you working out on your own? What did those things look like as you tried to improve yourself as a player?
It It was definitely more, I mean, I played a ton, don't get me wrong. So my father was an executive director of a nonprofit in Bridgeport, Connecticut that had 2 full court basketball gyms. So I was there after school, I mean, every day from like 3rd grade through 9th grade, you know? So I was playing all the time, but I was also very lucky because, you know, like I said, my father was a coach, my uncle was a coach. So we were doing Mike-ins at age like 8. You know, I was teaching other kids on the playground, like, hey, no, this is how you're supposed to do it. This is what my dad said, you know? So we had the fundamentals down without a doubt. And we practiced by ourselves. You know, we had a hoop, you know, outside in my driveway that I was always playing on. So I would say it was more one-on-one by a slim margin. Call it like 60-40 that I was working out on my own. And this was way before the word trainer. And now look, like I'm not the old guy in the pool. I'm 31 years old. So, you know, I'm not the old guy yelling at a cloud, but this was still way before the concept of a trainer. You know, you just worked out. That's just what you did. Now, maybe your high school coach was there or your AAU coach or your dad, whoever. But yeah, I mean, I feel like we were always working out, always playing, and it was just unstructured. I think that's really the big difference. You know, I didn't play AAU for 11 months out of the year. You know, I played in the spring, maybe a little in the summer, you know, through high school, obviously. But then it was high school hoops, and that was it.
What do you think kids miss out on the most because they don't play as much pickup unstructured basketball, because so much of what they do is structured, is either with their school team or with a travel team or with their AAU team? Just from what you've seen, your experience at the various places that you've been and the kids that you've interacted with and dealt with, what do you think kids miss from pickup basketball? What's the 1 or 2 just things that kids might have had in their game when they were playing more pickup basketball as opposed to what we have now? I'm just curious.
I would say it has nothing to do with the sport. I would say confidence and conflict resolution. I gained confidence because I had to play with older kids. I had to make the 5. You know, I had to get chosen. Like, I know that this seems kind of like this urban myth now that, like, you know, people were like, oh yeah, you know, we used to go to the playground and if you lost, you had to wait 3 games. Like, that was true. And it was awful. It was miserable if you lost. Like, it was miserable. You had to shoot on the side hoop. You got tight. Like, it sucked. So confidence and conflict resolution. If it was a foul, you had to argue that it was a foul and you had to figure it out. And if it came down to you shooting a 3 to see if you got the ball or not, that's what you did. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but I would say that my experience in the youth basketball world, which has been for now the past 6 years or so, conflict resolution is just not there. You know, any adversity that these kids face, you know, the first option is always flight. It isn't fight. You know, I gained my confidence through sports, through basketball, through trial and error, and through just a lot of embarrassing moments, you know, that sucked, and that you would go home and be like, man, all they think I can do is go to my right. Like, how am I going to fix that? I need to go to my left. Or all they think I can do is shoot or pull, you know, whatever it is in the basketball game. That's where I gained my confidence is those one-on-one sessions. So I would narrow it down to those 2 things, man. Like, I just don't see the confidence or the ability, like conflict resolution / just adversity. Like, can you handle any little like headwinds your way? I just don't see it.
Yeah, that's so true. I can speak to that as not only a coach, but also as a teacher, that in my phys ed classes, whenever there's a dispute amongst the rules or somebody has a controversy, there's never any attempt to solve it between kids. It's immediately those kids are running to the adult in the room, which in that case is me, trying to get me to make a judgment about what happened. And I think about the way, same as you, that I grew up playing, and again, not just backyard basketball, but backyard football and backyard baseball and backyard tennis and backyard games that we just made up on the fly that had rules that we all had to agree on. And you just learned how to stand up for yourself. You learned how to negotiate. And those are skills that I think, again, they're tremendously valuable to all of us in our real life. The ability to stand up for yourself and the ability to negotiate with others, that are things that kids, I think, used to learn in a different way through sports. And we've taken that away from them with the sort of adultification of youth basketball and youth sports in general. So I definitely agree with you there. And then the confidence piece, I think, is true as well, because when you look at getting an opportunity to play against older players, getting against to play against people who are from a different neighborhood than you, and you could do it without a coach watching you. So like to your point, when you're saying, hey, I got to improve because all they think I can do is shoot. So, or all they think I can do is go to the right. So got to make sure I go left. One of the things that I always try to do with pickup games is, if I was playing with better players, you kind of have to fill a role. Like, okay, this game I'm not going to be the leading scorer. So I got to figure out how can I help my team. And then conversely, I might play in a game where I was the best player. And now maybe to challenge myself, I might say, hey, I'm only going to go left here. Or I'm not going to call any fouls in this game, or I'm going to make sure I work on this particular thing. And I think kids today, because they always have to play in front of parents and coaches and adults and with a scoreboard, it makes it a lot harder for them to develop that confidence that you talked about and to develop sort of the freedom to try things. It's like in a game, you really only want to do the things that you're good at. So you don't ever kind of extend yourself the way I think kids did when they were playing pickup games. And that's not to say that kids today don't have benefits. As you said, nobody had heard of a trainer before, and there's obviously good and bad trainers. But generally speaking, kids are more skilled today than they were 10, 15, 20, certainly 30 years ago.
For sure.
When I was playing, they're way more skilled. The number of kids that can shoot threes and handle the ball and do all those things is much, much higher. But I do think some of those intangible things that I learned on the playground playing pickup basketball are not there nearly as much as they were back, again, as the old man, get off my lawn, back in my back in my day. So tell me a little bit about your favorite memory from playing high school basketball.
Oh man, favorite memory. I you know what? It's funny. The best basketball that I have ever played in my life was the summer as I was going into my senior year, and we played in a couple summer leagues, around in the Fairfield County, Connecticut area, and we're playing different scrimmages and practicing and doing whatever we were allowed to do back then. But it's a weird answer, I know, because it isn't a game. I didn't hit it I hit one game winner in my whole life. It was in 8th grade. It was meaningless, but I definitely remember that. But I just remember it was one of those. It was just like a feeling from May until I wish it continued in the season. It obviously didn't. But the summer, I was just on a tear. You want to talk about confidence? You couldn't tell me anything. I was as confident as I've ever been on the basketball court. I was playing as well as I ever had, making more shots, making all the right reads in the ball screen. People can't see me, but I'm a 5'11" white kid, so I was always the point guard. So I was just on the top of my game, and it was just a feeling that I had never had before. Everyone has a good game, everyone has a bad game, but I probably played as well as I possibly could for 4 straight months. It was something that I had just never experienced. And I'm not saying I played horrible my senior year. I played okay. But that will always stick with me. I don't know what it was. There wasn't a beginning or a hard end. It was just man, everything was clicking. Every time I picked up the ball, I felt extremely good about it. And I just always remember those couple months as man, I wonder if I could ever get back there. Not that I ever will, but it was just a remarkable sense of every time you walked on the court, it was man, I'm confident I'm going to do well. I'm confident my team's going to do well. And I'm confident we're going to win. Those 3 things, every single time I touched the ball for about 4 or 5 months were there. And that was just a fantastic feeling.
That's that flow state, right? When
yes.
You feel like everything's just going to go. It's just, you just know things are going to go well. And obviously anybody who's played, particularly basketball, but I'm sure any sport, you kind of get in that flow and you have that feeling for a game or two. But I can kind of relate to what you were saying in terms of just a period where you feel like you were at your best, you were playing, this is as well as I can ever remember playing. And I know I had stretches in my career where I felt hey, things are coming together. And it wasn't necessarily one hot streak or one great game, but it's just hey, I feel like I'm kind of getting it, kind of understanding and really maximizing what I can do. So why do you think that didn't carry over into your school season? Was it just...
Good question. I don't think I could pinpoint it to one thing. I think I got off to, again, come right back to that confidence thing. I got off to a tough start my senior year in terms of like the actual games. I think I had I played well my first game. I had probably like 10-5, something like that, just solid. And then the next 3 games, I was terrible. Like, couldn't make a 3, just bad, just really bad. And I remember at one point, like, getting subbed out for someone who I thought should not be subbing in for me. And that just kind of like always, I was like, oh no, like, what happened? You know, how did I get here from, like you said, that flow state of everything feeling really good? And I think that always stuck with me. Now it was fine. I wasn't playing horrible the whole year, but I never got back to that. And I don't know, like, there really wasn't this moment or this thing with like it just never got back to that summer period. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer.
That speaks to the power of your mind, though, right? I mean, when you think
100%.
when you think about as a coach or you think about as a player, when you're playing well or when you're not playing well, like, so much of that, it's not like physically you were any different from July to November. I mean, you were the same person physically. It's just you get in that mental state where you can get inside your own head and you think about, as a shooter or just in general, how you're playing, and you get the confidence piece, and when it's rolling and everything feels right, it just seems easy. And then conversely, when things don't go your way, it gets tough, and you wonder, like, what's that? You know, to your answer, you know, to my question, when you think about, okay, when did that switch flip? And it doesn't really flip. It's much more of a gradual, like, you don't even notice it kind of happening around you. And that's kind of almost goes both ways. Like, when you're going from good to mediocre or mediocre to good, you don't necessarily always notice those changes, but it's so much of it is in your mind. I think as a coach, it's one of the things that you try to do with your players is, how do I give my players the confidence? How do I instill in them the ability to get to that flow state easier? And it's tough. I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges. Have you experienced that as a coach in terms of helping a player specifically with their mental game? Is there an incident that you remember, or a particular player that you can maybe share a story about that?
Yes, 100%. I'm so happy you asked that, because I was going to talk about it. So I coached at Olentangy Orange this past year with the varsity team, which is a school down here in Columbus. And we had a very talented team. We had 2 really good seniors. One is going to play in college, Division II. The other had the potential to play D2, but is just choosing to go. I think he's going to Bowling Green, actually. You know, he's just kind of hanging it up, which is totally fine. Do, you know, whatever you want to do. But just to say that, like, we had some really good talent. But anyway, the kid that I'm talking about was a sophomore. He's now a junior. He's the best player on the team. And mentally, he was all over the place this year, confidence-wise. And to speak to that question, I struggled mightily as a coach this year trying to coach confidence. I had never had to coach it as hard as I had this past year. And it was a real challenge for me, because the past 5 years I was in New York City, and there's no shortage of confidence. And there's, you know, there's just none, even for kids that don't, like, hey man, you shouldn't be that confident, but I love it. You know, like, you're not,
you might want to tone that confidence down a little bit.
You're not that guy, but to be that guy, you kind of have to have that confidence, right? So I get it. But there was a sophomore here that we had, and the talent was off the charts, the potential off the charts. He's a shooter. And streaky, right? Like, if the first one went down, he's liable to give you 20. If the first one missed, you know, he may go 1 for 8 for the whole game, which I can relate to. And so what I really tried to do is, when he was playing well, I left him alone. For better or for worse, I just, you know, I was still coaching and telling whatever about a play or defensively, whatever it was. But if he was making shots and playing well and had a rhythm, I left him alone. If he was missing, I made it a point, almost after every single missed shot, to say, Elias, great shot. That's a good shot for you. Good job. Next one's in, right? Like, hey, next time, maybe, you know, 1 dribble pull, he's, you know, the guy's going to go for you, whatever it is, but never a negative reinforcement, because I know that feeling as a shooter, that if a couple don't go and then you get pulled, even if most of the time you're not getting pulled because you missed a shot, right? Like kids just think that naturally. Even if you weren't getting pulled that way, they think it. So they're like, oh man, like now I'm 1 for 4. Like I'm going to be nervous about my next shot. I was always trying to avoid that with him. But it was a struggle, Mike. Like I really, for the first time in my career, like I didn't really have a good answer or a strategy for it, but that's what I ended up with. It was like, if they're in a good rhythm, leave them alone. And this isn't like earth-shattering stuff, obviously, but just tried to really be positive on every miss, especially when they were struggling. And like bringing him in the huddle and saying, hey, what do you think on that last shot? That was a good one, right? Good look. Yeah, you're going to be able to get it again when we run, Duke or Carol, whatever our play was. Like, you're going to be able to get it again. Be ready and shoot it. So just that's what I tried. But it's hard. It's hard.
That's that process versus outcome to some degree, right? Because you're telling the kid, hey, that's a good shot for you. Hey, things look good on your shot. Just keep it going. Even though the outcome was he missed, you don't want to say, well, that's terrible. What are you doing? The shot didn't go in. You don't want your players thinking that. You want them thinking, hey, I'm taking good shots here. I'm doing the things I'm supposed to do. Sometimes the ball just doesn't go in the basket, and that doesn't mean that you stop doing what you've been successful in the past and that you're going to be successful with in the future. But it's hard because I think when you try to coach a player's mind, so many of us approach things differently inside our own head. And you think about how when you try to get to know somebody as a coach, you try to get to know the players. What buttons do I have to push, and how do I have to motivate them, and what works? Does this one need a little bit more of a push from behind? Does this one need more of an arm around them? And I think that goes doubly when you start talking about, okay, now I got to figure out not only how do I motivate them sort of in a physical way, but now I got to get inside their head and understand them. And most of the time, we have a hard time enough understanding our own minds and how those work, let alone trying to get into somebody else's. I think as a coach, to me, that's one of the things that, man, if you could figure out how to do that well as a coach, you could really tap into some things with players. And I'm sure there are guys around the country that spend a lot of time, even maybe unknowingly, that they're just really good at being able to tap into and helping players build their confidence.
Yep, 100%. And it comes down to caring, and again, like most people practice this, like you said, across the country. Guys are doing this all the time, but like spending time with them off the court, finding ways to talk about things other than practice, the scouting report, the game. A coach, I can't remember who it was, but somebody along the way in the past 10 years or so said to me, the most important times are walking to and from practice. And I never forgot that, like joking with them in the hallway or, talking about class or whatever it is. That's honestly, it's more important because if you don't get that part down, then you're never going to get to them on the basketball court. So I always took that to heart. We had like a funny thing at Orange where, I was like, I always coached the orange team and then the other assistant coached the blue team. And if our team went undefeated, we always had different challenges throughout the practice. If they didn't lose for the day, then immediately after practice, again, not the healthiest thing, but we went to Krispy Kreme. So like, like they would be like 5-0 and they knew that there was only one more drill and they'd be screaming like, we're getting Krispy Kreme today, baby. We're going, so like just little things, you got to find those little things where you can just connect with them outside, of the court of practice.
Absolutely. That small talk is really where you forge the relationship, because when you think about what goes on the practice floor, yeah, you have interaction, but most of it is involving coaching instruction, right? And yeah, maybe you're on the sideline, you can have a little quick conversation, but for the most part, if you're coaching, you're trying to pay attention to what's going on out on the floor. And so during a water break, walking to and from the locker room, after locker room time, after the game, putting your arm around somebody, having those small conversations. If you're a teacher in a high school setting and you're in the hallway and you get an opportunity to talk to a kid in between classes, and I think to me, that's really where you build the type of relationship that then allows you to push your kids when it comes to being on the basketball floor. And it's just, it all comes back to, you have to care about them, not only as basketball players, but you have to care about them as people. And I think that that's something that I think it's always been there, but I do think that there is more awareness of it. I think there's less coaches who are strictly about, hey, when you step between the lines, you have to do X, Y, and Z, and it's more of a transactional type situation. Those coaches, I think, were more prevalent 30 or 40 years ago, and I honestly think that they're few and far between anymore, just because people are so educated on what it takes to be able to reach kids today and get the most out of them, which ultimately is your job as a coach, is to get the most out of them, both as an athlete, but then even more importantly as a person. I think there's just more awareness of that in the coaching ranks. Have you seen that become an even bigger emphasis at some of the programs that you've worked at?
Yeah, and I think the coaches that are doing it best highlight their. I mean, some of them alumni, other ones, if they're going like one and done, but just the players that return to the program. Honestly, if I was still in college, that would be like my number one, as long as it was good, obviously, but that would be my number one recruiting pitch is when you leave here, these are the amount of guys that come back in the summer and work out. These are the guys that come back and get treatment. This is how many guys came back and finished their degree, or came back and got a job with us, or, whatever it is. Like, to me, that's the full circle. Like, of course, the number one priority for an 18-year-old who's going high D1 is hopefully to have a very good time in college, get a degree if you're going to be there 4 years, and then go to the NBA or overseas. Like, that's a lot of, if not the vast majority of players' goals if they're going the high major D1 route. But after that, it's got to be a life cycle, right? Like, okay, how am I taking care of you for life, though? And I think the coaches that do that are going to succeed in the next 10, 20 years. And I should say be the most successful in the next 10, 20 years, for sure.
Are you tired of slipping and sliding on the court and sticky sheets just aren't giving you grip? Grip Spritz solves this problem without having to lick your hand to clean your shoes. Grip Spritz is used by countless AAU, high school and college programs, semi-pro teams, as well as NCAA athletes and G League players. Unlike other products, Grip Spritz has solutions for individual players, not just entire teams. We've used Grip Spritz at our Head Start basketball camps and players love it. To keep you and your team from slipping and sliding, visit gripspritz.net to learn more. How do you see coaches doing that in your experience? What have you seen coaches do to foster that kind of connection with alumni? Because I think that's one of the things that I look at my own experiences, and for a lot of years at Kent, there was like a disconnect between the alumni and the program. I think it's way, way better. Coach Senderoff has done a much better job of keeping guys connected and having people back in the program. Obviously, he's been there now a lot longer than anybody else, and that, we had a huge stretch of time where guys were there a year, 2, 3 years, and so it's hard to build that continuity. But I think building those alumni relations to me are so critical, because there's nobody better to sell your program than people who have gone through it. So what have you seen some of the coaches that you've worked for, what have you seen them do to engage alumni that you feel has been successful that other coaches or other programs could maybe emulate even at the high school level?
Yeah, so, I mean, first of all, you hit the nail on the head. Like, you have to be there for a little while, right? Like, if you're only at a school for 4 or 5 years, it's very hard to build what we're talking about. The guy that I worked for that did a really good job was Coach Cooley at Providence. He invited everybody. I mean, if you went to Providence, if you played at Providence, if you were a cousin of somebody who was a fan of you could come. Like, he wanted to open the doors. Because prior to that, it was very closed off. It was very much like men's basketball is over here and the rest of the athletic department is separate. And so he just kind of opened the doors to everybody. He even brought God Shamgod back on staff as a player development guy. Now he's in the NBA. I thought that was very smart. That was huge. He hired former players. I was a GA there with Mike Ivanovich, who played for Coach Cooley at Fairfield. That's another way to do it. Like, those things, and then just, I mean, this is the simplest one, is just events. Like, you need to invite people back to campus, invite people back to games, introduce the guy that graduated in 96 to the guy that graduated in 2006, and maybe he'll give him a job. You know what I mean? Like, those are those like synergies and connections that you need to foster as a head coach, as long as you're there for a while. I do think that's super important. Like, I just don't know if people will buy in if you're there for 4 or 5 years and then you leave. Like, it's impossible to do.
Yeah, it's really tough, I think, in that case, because you don't have those connections to multiple sort of generations, multiple classes of players that you have that direct connection with that you can reach out to. Because I think it starts with building the network with guys that you really know, or that you get to know by, again, having events, whether it's an alumni game or whether it's just inviting players back to, hey, this is the night where we're going to have everybody come in and watch our games, or we have a golf outing or whatever it might be. To me, those are huge ways to be able to engage the players who played in your program. And again, there's no better salespeople for your program than the people who've come back. And you described it really well when you just talk about, hey, when we can help guys get jobs, maybe it's on staff or maybe it's other connections that we have, or, you know, we're always thinking about how we can help and build the relationship again over time. Where, you know, I graduated from Kent almost 30 years ago now, and I try to get back to at least one game every year, because I feel like it keeps me connected to the program, even though I've been gone a long time and they've probably been through, 10 or 11 coaches since my time was gone. But I still go back and I walk in the gym and I still feel that connection. And to me, that's really important. I think it's got to be important to the program itself when you start thinking about where you want to go and the impact that you want to have as a coach on the people who play in your program. And clearly you want to have success on the court, or you're not going to be there very long, especially at the Division I level. But ultimately, there's also other things that go along with that are ancillary benefits when you not only win on the court, but you also win off the court, and you have an impact on the student athletes that you get an opportunity to coach. And really, when you think about it, that's what it's all about. So kind of along those lines, let's work back in time. When did you know that coaching was going to be something that was in your future? You mentioned right off the top that you were demonstrating the mic and drill for your buddies when you were 8 years old. So I'm guessing that coaching was probably something that was on your radar from being a young age, but just talk to me a little bit about when coaching became a thought in your mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was always something that I thought I would get into at a young age, but it didn't become what I knew I wanted to do until about sophomore, junior year of high school. When, you start going on college visits, you're starting to think about a major, all that type of stuff. So from there, I was like, you know what, I'm going to dive in. I'm going to go into this college basketball world and see what I can do. And so when I was looking at schools, I was looking for schools with really good sport management degrees and majors. And then I was looking for any connections that I had that I could go be a manager. And, during the summers, like, I was working basketball camps across the country. I was one of those kids. So from junior year of high school till junior year in college, so, almost 4 or 5 years there, I was working camps. I worked Duke, I worked Carolina, Florida, Syracuse, Siena. I mean, like, you name it on the East Coast, I was trying to work it. And so I had a one-off connection to Tim O'Shea, who was the then head coach at Ohio U, and I knew I was going to be able to have a spot and be a manager. So, and then you visit Ohio University, and it's like, yeah, here's all my money. I'll sign on the dotted line. It's just the most beautiful campus, and it's just unbelievable. So I had a great time as well. But I knew sport management and then coaching, and got to start as wiping sweat, man, and that will. Not that I was cocky or arrogant, but that'll humble you real quick. You're coming off a high school and playing, and you're like, oh man, like, this is going to be so much fun. And then you wipe up sweat and you fill up water bottles and you do laundry and you break down film and you're there late and there early. And it's like, oh God, like, is this what I want to do? And yeah, I mean, you quickly see, like, yeah, this isn't the whole, I'm not going to be doing this forever. But yeah, that was the start. That was the start with Coach O'Shea. And then after my freshman year, he went to Bryant to help them rebuild from the D2 to D1. I shouldn't say rebuild, but transition. And John Gross came in. And I was with Coach Gross for 3 years. And we were, lucky enough to, beat Georgetown in that historic run, which was funny. We actually played in Providence, so that was a little forthcoming. But we beat Georgetown in that shocker 14 over a 3 seed, which was just the most. I mean, if it didn't set in then, that was just the most amazing experience ever. And I was like, yeah, this is what I want to do. This is it.
All right, so I got a lot to unpack. I want to go back first. I want to go back first to your camp experience. What's your favorite camp you ever worked?
Well, I'm biased, man. I'm sure people are going to, if you're still listening to the podcast, thank you. This is probably where you're tuned out, but I'm a Duke fan. So I had the opportunity to work Duke basketball camp and meet Coach K and the staff. And I did that for 2 straight summers. And it was surreal. You know, I mean, we got to play at Cameron Indoor at 10:30 at night after we put the campers to bed and stuff. And that was surreal. But I will say the best camp I ever worked was Florida. Billy Donovan was unbelievable. The staff was unbelievable. You know what? I would say Villanova and Florida are tied because Jay Wright was also unbelievable. Like, every night they would have cheesesteaks and wings for the staff at night. Like, I couldn't drink. I mean, I was drinking beer, just not at camp because I was in college, but they wouldn't let you because I was, 19 or 20. So I had, I don't know, a ginger ale.
There you go.
But you just tell, you can tell, right? Like, they take care of their camp, their staff. They pay more than, a freaking $175 for 5 days of work. And, they feed you, they take care of you, they give you a whole bunch of gear, like they talk to you, like I had an opportunity to speak with Jay Wright and speak with Billy Don. Like that goes miles, that goes a long way. And one of my buddies who was a manager at Louisville, when we worked Florida camp, like that's how he was a video coordinator after Louisville at Florida because he worked camp, because these guys talk to you. So it works, working the camp circuit and, flying all around the country and all that, like it works. So I'll say I'll go Florida and Villanova for best camps.
Yeah, those connections are invaluable. I think that if there's any advice that has been universal for young coaches with everybody that we've talked to, it's get out and meet and talk to as many people as you can, work camps. Obviously, the camp circuit is a little bit different now, even than when you were kind of going through it. Just, you have more of the showcases and the elite camps and that kind of thing. And sort of the old school fundamental type camps that at least that I grew up with, those are not quite as prevalent. Although most schools are still doing some version of it, they're not quite the same. It's not quite as easy to get that conversation going with the staff and that kind of thing the way that I might have experienced, the way you might have experienced. But I do think for any young coach out there, if you're really looking to get into the business, especially when you start talking about college coaching, the more college camps you can get in to work at, to volunteer at, to just get yourself in front of people, I think that's a great way to be able to meet people, to be able to network. And as you said, one of the best ways to get jobs is somebody knows somebody who knows somebody who knows you. And before you know it, that at least gets your foot in the door. And so camps are a great way to be able to build your network. When you think about being there at OU, what were some of the, as a manager, what were some of the things that you were privy to that the coaching staff was doing? In other words, did you get to sit in on was there specific meetings that you were able to sit in on and specific meetings that you were excluded from sitting on? What were some of the things from a coaching standpoint that you got to take part in, even if it was just observational right from sort of the beginning? And maybe that was different under Tim O'Shea versus John Gross, but just what were some of the things that you got to see?
Yeah, I mean, freshman year, it was really nothing. I was the low man on the totem pole. We had probably like 8 managers. I was the brand new guy, so nothing. Truly, like not in one meeting, like, it was like, we need to feel this kid out. Like we don't really, like, we know him and like, you're good to be here, but like, we're not going to invite you in the scouting room quite yet, which is fair, totally get it. And then sophomore year, you kind of had to start all over. So it was like, all right, like, let's do this again. But I had at least been there a year, and Gross is he's a lot now. Yeah, I call him an Ohio State guy. Some people would call him Xavier. He's an Ohio. He's been coaching for a long time, and so they had a whole process, like I had to interview, like with Coach O'Shea, I did meet with him and talk with him, but it was like it was just informal and like, yeah, like here's the deal. With Coach Gross, it was like, no, like, why do you want to do this? And there was just much more about it. So it felt a little bit more like, oh damn, like this is the real deal. So sophomore year, you kind of start to build that rapport. And as a manager, how you build it is just by showing up. Like there's so many unreliable people out there because it's no pay, it's long hours, you're in college, like who wants to do this right now? So like you really got to want to do it. And once they see that, very quickly I was on every single road trip. I was starting to be with like the ops guy who's Aaron Foos, who's actually at Kent State and coming down for the coaches clinic. Like I would be with him all the time, right? Or like we would be talking much more. And then by the time junior year hit, that's when I would be able, like, essentially I just wasn't getting kicked out of rooms, like if I just was happen to be cleaning something up and it was like a post-game meeting, like they weren't like, Paul, get out. It was just like, yeah, right. It's okay, you can be here. And then by senior year on road trips, it is what it is. Like I was the gopher to go get, if we had a long road trip, let's say we had to go to Kent State. Like Kent State in the winter is not exactly fun. The coaches wanted a 6-pack or, maybe a 24, who knows. And, right. And so, I went and got those and then we sat in the room and we talked about the game. And, the manager and the GA, it's a precarious situation because you're closer to the players. Like I was, I won't say this for everybody, but I was very close to the players. So when Coach Gross realized that, he basically was like, hey man, like the allegiance, if you want to be a college basketball coach, like the allegiance is to the coaches. Like, and I don't mean that to say like people don't care about the players. It just means like, if something's going down, like you got to tell us, man. Like right. If you're close with them and there's a party or someone's about to get in trouble or somebody skipped class. So it's actually really tough when you start to get closer with your staff because you're with your guys all the time. You're eating, you're going out, you're hanging out, you're traveling all the time. So you form really strong bonds with these players. But at the end of the day, the coaches are like, yeah, okay, but like, did he go to class? And you're in this tough spot, like, shit, man, like, and sometimes maybe I did lie, and then I would text the player and be like, yo, man, I just lied. I don't know if you're gonna get caught. Like, I don't know. Sometimes I'm sure I did. But sorry, long-winded answer to say, it gradually increased from nothing to helping with scouting reports to full-time. By senior year, I was basically a video coordinator and really like involved and like could give my opinion, not to Coach Gross or, but to the ops guy maybe or to the GA and be like, hey, like, this is what I see. And I just watched 9 games of Miami of Ohio. Like, I think, you know what I mean? Like, here's what I'm seeing. And they may listen or they may pass it along. And so it certainly grew for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've said this before on the podcast, but I honestly, when I look back on like my playing career, and I never once during my entire playing career did I look at the guys who were managers, and I was good friends with a couple of them, and there's still one guy that I talk to occasionally, and obviously if I ever ran into somebody, there's a couple that I see every once in a while. Like I still consider those guys to be friends, but I never once in my life did I look at them during my entire 4-year career and go, oh, these guys want to get into coaching. Like my thought, honestly, as a player was, oh, they just like hanging around the team. They want to be around the players. Like I never considered it to be a track for guys that wanted to coach. And it may not have even been as much of that back. Again, we're talking 30 some odd years ago. Obviously it changed, I think, a little bit. It's become much more of a route into coaching than probably it was when I was playing. But it never even crossed my mind. I think it's interesting, like what you talked about, that, here you are as a college student, just like the players are college students, and you're hanging out with those guys and you're eating with them and you're going out and you're right there kind of with them going through it. And yet when they go away from practice, you're going and walking and sitting down in the coach's office, and you kind of then become that conduit, puts you in a kind of a difficult spot. Was there a particular player or players that you bonded with, that you became better friends with over the course of your career? And then just how did you develop those relationships?
Yeah, there definitely was. I mean, even to the point where, we'd be like hanging out over the summer, or people would like we would like travel to see each other, things like that. I honestly, I think it just happens naturally where you're around them all the time. You start to, vibe with certain guys or whatever it is. And it just kind of happened naturally. Now, I will say it did change pretty quickly from Ohio U to Providence because, the GA, it's a slight step up above a manager, but it's still still a step up in terms of, I never went out with the guys at Providence. Like I just wasn't doing that. And so that was certainly a different dynamic. And it was much more, I was more tasked with, of course, a ton of video and then just like back end operational stuff, travel and meals and all that stuff. But really my job was like, all right, of course I had to do all the film for the coaches, but then I was, Coach Cooley gave me some reign to like show players film. And so that's really where I developed my relationships at Providence was like, Vince Council was the point guard when I was there, and it was like, all right, Vince, like, look, like we're gonna go over your last 4 games, all your shots, or whatever it was, and that's where I started to build bonds there because to them, I think they looked at me, and I'm sure maybe this happens across the board with GAs, is like I'm non-threatening, like I don't control your playing time, I don't control anything actually. So I'm just telling you from 2 eyes that here's what we see. Here's maybe some tidbits, here's some things to improve, whatever it is. And I think they just really appreciated the honesty, because there was no reason for me. What am I going to sugarcoat? Like I didn't recruit you. I'm not recruiting. I don't need to like fluff you up and like keep you happy. Like I don't need to do any of that. Like that's all the coaches' jobs, man. Like here's what I see. Like you've been lazy on the ball screens, or you've been phenomenal in the whatever it is. Like that's where I really developed the relationships at Providence.
What did you learn in that first year that you were at Providence, just from a basketball standpoint? What were some things that you picked up as a coach that you could then relay to the players? Was it player development stuff? Was it X's and O's? Was it scouting? What do you feel like you learned the most? Or maybe what was the area where you came into coaching with sort of the least amount of knowledge that you feel like you were able to build up to speed quickly as you got into it more?
That was 100%. I'm happy you said like up to speed, or like I didn't realize how little I knew about basketball, and I had been playing and around it in college. Now again, like managers have no impact in the coaching, so it's not like we were really doing any of that. Of course, we're watching video, we're helping prepare scouting reports for sure, but we're not coaches. And I didn't realize how little I knew about X's and O's until I got to Providence and really got to sit, because we had 3 GAs. Each GA was assigned to an assistant coach, and, the scouts rotated each coach. And so, my first year, I was with Coach Bob Simon. My second year, I was with Coach Brian Blaney. And the level of detail that these guys go into, make sure that, and again, like this is probably another like side tangent that we can talk about, like what players actually retain. But again, like the coaches are going to go through it, right? I mean, they're going to prepare for everything. And I just realized, man, I never watched basketball this way. And now it's gotten to the point where like I can't watch basketball without like pausing it and being like, oh, that was a really cool ball screen rotation that they did. Like now it's like torture. But that was a huge transition for me. And it's just because you sit there and you literally watch hours of film for 2 straight years. Like, of course you're going to get better at it. So that was a big transition. I just did not realize how little I knew until you just study and have to scout.
I think universally that, especially if you've played, I think you have this perception that you understand the game at whatever level it is that you understand it as a player. And yet when you realize and you look at what goes into being a good coach and what goes into putting together an offensive and defensive system and all the X's and O's, I think most people quickly come to the realization that, hey, I don't really know a whole lot. And I think about my own experience as a player and then going to be a coach for the first time. And the only things I knew were the things that I learned from my high school coach and the things I learned from my college coach. Played for the same high school coach my entire career, played for the same college coach for 4 years. never went to another team's practice, never really saw anybody else do anything from a coaching standpoint. So when I started coaching my first team, the only things I did from a drill standpoint, from an X's and O's standpoint, were what I had been taught and what I had learned and what I had done as a player. And when you think about how limited that is, I mean, it's kind of incredible that I survived it all in coaching. And I just never had, I was never a person, for whatever reason. I think whether it was ego or it was just the fact of, hey, I'm good enough to be good enough, that I was never somebody that, unfortunately, that sought out X's and O's and studied tape and did all those things, especially as a young coach. I just didn't do that. And I think back on it, and I just wonder that had my initial experiences maybe been a little bit different, or if I'd have approached it a little differently, maybe that would have taken me in a different direction as far as coaching goes. And I'm not unhappy in any way, shape, or form with what I ended up doing and how I ended up doing it. But you kind of look at it and you say, hey, there was so much that I didn't know. And I was even a step behind you because I didn't even realize it. You know what I mean? You at least got into it and you're like, oh man, like there's a lot of stuff I got to learn from these guys. Whereas I was kind of like, well, this is what I'm doing. And I'm just going to kind of go ahead and do it this way. And my first 2 years of coaching, I coached a JV team, and the two guys who were the varsity coaches, one guy had been the coach for, I don't know, he might've been there for 40 years. It was his last season, was my first season. So he obviously had very little, he wasn't looking to mentor a 22-year-old kid who was coming into his program. And then the next year, a guy who did kind of watch out for me, but he was also his veteran assistant, who had probably been his assistant for like 25 years, took over the program. And so it just wasn't on their radar, and it wasn't on mine for whatever reason. And to your point, I think that there's so much that any young coach has to learn that you have no idea until you get around the great basketball minds that we have. There's so many people that are so good at X's and O's at every level of basketball. You can talk about all the levels of college basketball. You can talk about some of the high school coaches that are out there that are just tremendous tacticians and teachers of the game. And there's so much more opportunity, I think, now to learn, just because of the advent of whether it's Huddle or just being able to go on YouTube if you're not affiliated with a team and you don't have a Huddle account. I mean, there's just so many ways to learn now that weren't accessible even 10 years ago.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, I mean, I think to talk to your player point of view versus coach's point of view, I think that's spot on. I think a lot of players are thinking from a very surface level, or one checkers move, and the coach has thought about the next 4 moves of every decision that you've just thought of, right? Like, there's a reason we're doing it this way. Right. I don't have time to explain it to you in the game, but okay, if you want to do this on the ball screen, this is why we can't do it. Whatever the situation is. But that's what I learned too, is the strategy behind it and how in-depth those meetings got. If we're playing, Syracuse on the road and we're thinking about all the different looks we're going to do, or are we just going to keep it simple and try and screen it? We threw out everything, and so then it's about having a united front and presenting it to the players, but the players just see that. So well, why don't we try this, or why don't we try that? And it's well, we did all that. We tried all that on the whiteboard, or we tried this in practice and it didn't. We're the really good ones, they can see 4 or 5 moves ahead. And that was just, I never got there. That's for the coaches that are still coaching.
Well, and ultimately I do think from a player perspective, even the most unselfish players out on the floor, to some degree, when you're thinking about what you do in practice or what you do in games, you're mostly looking at it through the lens of how does it affect me?
Sure. Yep.
And, even if I'm a great passer and I'm unselfish out on the floor, I still want to be put into positions where I can take advantage of that particular skill and make passes or do whatever it is that I do. And as a coach, obviously you're concerned with a much bigger picture than just what impacts any one individual player. And that goes to something that you mentioned a second ago, where you talk about the amount of depth that coaches go into on a scouting report and the amount of film that they watch. And then you think about what a player can retain. And I remember we would get, when I was at Kent, we'd get a 2-page scouting report that would have some stuff about the team. And then there'd be some individual information about personnel that you might look at. Oh, you're going to be guarding this guy. So there'd be, 4 sentences about what that player liked to do. And I think back to reading through that and just basically my eyes glazing over and just being I'm just, like this just clutters up my head. I need to just go out and play my game and do the things that I do. And I think you rely more on the physical side of it. And maybe there were some players that found more benefit in a scouting report than I did. But I always just felt like, look, what I did out on the practice floor from a physical standpoint and working through it and thinking about it was more valuable than anything that a coach handed me on a piece of paper. And obviously it's much easier to watch video than it was back in the day when I was playing, when you were VCRing and trying to rewind and hit the button and all the issues that go along with that. It's much easier for coaches to, clip up the video and get guys, certain sequences and things they want them to see, both about personnel and different actions or whatever that they might want to see. Hey, hoopheads, we all hate ankle sprains, and they happen way too often. Ankle injuries are the #1 sports-related injury. Arise is trying to change that. With the iFast, your athletes get preventative protection and full mobility. Athletes no longer need to wear bulky braces that limit performance and give mediocre protection. Anyone playing sports should be using these products. Keep your athletes in the game. Don't wait for them to get hurt to take action. Visit www.arise.com/team pricing to learn more. That's ARYSE.com. In your experience, like what's the ideal amount to share with players? We know the coaches are going to do a ton of work, but what's the ideal amount to share with a player, let's say at the Division I college level, that they're actually going to retain and be able to use?
Yeah, I think the best that I've seen it, and even in my 2-year period at Providence, like we adjusted because even in the beginning we were just throwing the kitchen sink at them, and like you said, they were retaining a little bit of it. So I think it should be very much player focused, and just sometimes we even did, I think my second year at Providence, we would do comparisons. So we'd be like, all right, this guy's a Reggie Miller, this guy's a JJ Redick, like whatever great shooter you want to compare him to, like that's what you need to remember. That's it, shooter. Like you can't let this guy open, like long closeouts, can't be short, whatever. And then vice versa, right? Like this guy's a driver, left-hand driver, that's it. I think the best coaches, what they attempt to do is just take away whatever they're strongest at. You're never going to take away 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if you can take away what they're best at, then I think your scouting report worked. Now, if you get beat, if you get beat and you're playing a team full of 3-point shooters and they go lights out from pump fake, one dribble, long twos, well, then you got beat. Like, okay, fine. But they didn't beat you with their threes. Like, I think most coaches can live with that. So to me, I think it should be very much player focused and then just drill down their one offensive play. Whatever they do 50% of the time, just do that. Because as long as you're teaching like basic defensive principles, you're guarding the same thing all the time. You're guarding down screens, cross screens, back screens, ball screens. Like you're guarding that all the time. So as long as you put in your principles, like a play is a play. Like you're going to guard all those screens. So to me, it should be player focused and then like 1, maybe 2 offensive sets, and that's it.
Yeah, I think that's really a good guideline when you start talking about what players can retain and then can you actually use. I mean, I might be able to retain some stuff, but in order for me to be able to recognize it and be able to clutter my head with that, plus what I'm trying to do with our team and the offense that we're trying to run and the defensive schemes that we're trying to run, forget about just what's specific to the opponent. I like breaking it down and giving them, hey, here's one thing for the personnel, the guy that you're going to be guarding, and here's one thing that is their main action. If we can take away that and we understand how to guard and do the things that we do, then we're going to be able to have success. But it's hard to do, especially when you're coaching. You have all this knowledge. Part of you, I know, wants to share it and be like, let me give them more and more and more. And eventually it's just like anything else. There's diminishing returns when you keep giving them so much stuff.
100%.
All right. Talk a little bit about some of your other stops along the way through your college coaching career. And then maybe we can get into why you decided to step away.
Yeah, for sure. So after the 2 years at Providence, I would have loved to have stayed there, but people were really happy. Nobody left, so there was nowhere to go. So I went to Central Connecticut, which was just about an hour and a half away, which was actually really cool for me because obviously born and raised in Connecticut. So, to coach for a school in the state I grew up in was very, very cool. I worked for the head coach there at the time was Howie Dickerman. He is a longtime UConn assistant who got the job, call it in like 96. So he had been there for a very long time, had a really good run at Central Connecticut. I was there as the ops guy, and I was there for a year. To make a very long story short, it was a tough year on the court and off the court, and the entire staff actually ended up leaving, obviously besides Coach Dickerman. So one guy got out. Another guy became an AD at a high school, and actually two guys got out. And then I went down to Kennesaw State and was the ops guy for 2 months, and then got promoted to the assistant in August because our third assistant left. So it was like, it started off as the most perfectly timed move. I felt like a genius, even though it was just pure luck. And at the end of the year, everybody in this business says, you're not in the business until you get fired. Our head coach got fired. So it went from, man, this is going to be great. My girlfriend at the time, now wife, was in love with Atlanta. She was in love with her job. We were like, holy crap. And I most people may not admit this, but I actually never wanted to be a collegiate head coach. I wanted to be a high major Division I assistant, and that was it. That's all I wanted to be. I didn't want to be the guy doing the interviews. I wanted to be the guy walking past the head coach as he had to deal with the press. That's all I wanted to do. Now, Kennesaw, I had not reached my goal, but I was a Division I assistant coach at the age of 25, and I was like, I made it. Like, this is it. This is all I want to be doing. I was in love with it, in love with the process. I loved every minute of it, but our head coach got fired, and I can tell you about what happened after that, I guess.
All right, keep going.
Yeah. So I think this was my first real bad experience with college hoops, is where, so the head coach got fired. We were on, the remainder of the assistant coaches were on salary for like 2 more months or something like that. So, we got to go to the Final Four and all that, but it was honestly one of the toughest parts of my career, because people that I talked to every day, every week, every month didn't return my call, or wouldn't get back to me, or like weren't really, like I needed help, like I needed somebody to, and I don't care what it was, like, let me go be an ops guy again or whatever, I needed help, and I wanted to stay in, and I was willing to move. And, college coaches, they move, probably on average, like every 2-3 years. So it didn't really matter to me. I was young, and it just didn't happen, to make another long story short. And I just had a really, really bad taste in my mouth for what I thought was going to happen in terms of like the help, right? Like, hey, and by help, I mean like calls or emails or text to coaches or something. And it really just felt like, wow, like this is it. Like, you get fired and people were just like, and I didn't even get fired. You know what I mean? It's not like I did it.
Right.
It wasn't me. And it just left me with this horrible, horrible feeling. And I thought, man, this is going to happen again, right? Like, the odds are that I'm going to work for a staff. If I stayed in college basketball my entire career, that's another 40 years. I'm probably going to work for a staff that gets fired. And I don't ever want to experience this again. And I don't ever want to feel like all these relationships that I built over the past 8 years, like I can't call on. Like, why? Like, why aren't people willing to help? And so it just left this horrible feeling. And I thought, you know what? Let me get out of it for a bit. Honestly, the intention was not to get out altogether. And I could have gone probably like to a junior college in Kansas and made $10,000 a year and gotten like free food. But that just wasn't, it just wasn't in the cards for me at that point. And so I got out, I got a sales job. I made more money than I ever had. I experienced what Saturday and Sundays are. That's called the weekend for college coaches. And, I just thought, okay, like maybe this is it. And then I had an opportunity through a college, former college coach. His name's Michael Murphy. His last stop was at Columbia, and he formed a youth sports organization up in New York City. And that was in 2016. We had gotten fired the spring of 2014. So I took a year off. I stayed in Atlanta doing the sales job. I moved up to New York, and I was back in like the youth hoops, AAU, coaching high school thing. And once I did that, I quickly saw, man, I really don't miss it. And somebody actually, Coach Aaron Foose, who's at Kent State, who's again coming to the clinic, he put it perfectly to me when I was fresh out, a couple months, and I knew I wasn't going to get back in and the season was starting. He said, listen, man, like, the grass is not always greener, like enjoy where you're at, like take a year off. You can always try and get back in. But he framed it to me like this. He said, I really work for 31 days out of the year. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, I work for game days. He's like, because there is no feeling that can replicate that in like the normal corporate America or like real, 9 to 5 traditional real world. He's like, I work for those 31 days. He's like, there's nothing like it. There's nothing like working and preparing and scouting to try and beat an opponent, and then you go out and you do it. There's like no better feeling. And I was like, that is 100% true. And I'm not, all those guys that are like, oh, it's a grind, it's a grind, it's a grind. It's like, you work a lot. Don't get me wrong, but like we coach basketball. Like, we're not saving the world. We're not rocket scientists. We're not doctors. It's a lot. But when he put it that way, I was like, man, I don't know if I'll ever go back after hearing that. Like, you're right. You work for 31 days and you hope you get 20 wins, right? And just survive. I was like, right. Man, so it just, once I got to the youth side and I could scratch the itch, because don't get me wrong, like I always say coaching is a disease. It is. It's in your blood if you need to do it, and I need to do it, but I'm so happy that I do it at the youth and high school level. That's perfectly fine with me.
So is it the, I don't know, pressure is maybe the wrong word. Is it the time commitment? What do you like about, let's frame it in a positive way. What do you like about what you did with Kids in the Game and then what you're doing now with Pro Skills? What's the positive part of that for you? What do you really enjoy about what you're doing now and what you've been doing since you got out of college coaching? Yeah,
I would say there's no nonsense. There's college coaches joke all the time that actually coaching basketball is like 10% of their job. Whereas now coaching basketball is 100% of my job. Like that's what I do when I'm coaching. Whether it's high school or an 8th grade team here in Columbus or New York City, that was the best part. And yeah, I mean, pressure is one thing, like, yeah, you got to win and all that stuff. But it's just, you kind of get back to the root of it. You get back to the basics and you remember that you enjoy coaching because you enjoy helping people. I love the process of watching a kid improve. And that moment that it clicks for him of like, maybe he's been struggling for a while or he can't go left or he's not a good shooter or whatever it was. And he puts in the time and we like work at it. And then he succeeds in a game, he or she succeeds in a game. I mean, there's nothing better than that, no matter what level, USA basketball all the way down to 3rd grade, CYO. So I think that it's like, I really got down to the root of it and I was like, like I wanted to coach college forever. I loved my experience in it. I hated how it ended and I just didn't want to go through that again. So I was like, well, if this is going to satisfy my addiction to coaching, then I'm good. I mean, this is perfect for me.
Yeah, absolutely. A better schedule.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure more conducive to being married and more conducive to family for sure moving forward. The number of coaches that we've talked to, we all know the amount of time that are required. Again, no matter what the level of coaching, it's always a challenge is to be able to balance your family and balance basketball and the needs of your basketball team. There's no doubt about that. How did you get connected to Brennan and Logan with Pro Skills? Give us the story behind that.
Yeah, so I was at Kids in the Game. I started there in June 2016. I helped launch their basketball programming, and then just what I was really my main job was business development there. So it was really just growing the youth sports startup as a whole, and basketball was one of the programs there. So grew a team, from really nothing to about like 8 or 9 travel teams and summer camps and clinics and, everything that a youth basketball organization does. And I actually got connected with them through a friend, JD, who was working with them in New York City. And the original plan was for me to leave Kids in the Game and basically start Pro Skills Basketball in New York City. And that was like June 2019. I flew down to the Jay Billis skills camp that they help with down there in Charlotte, and met with them, and had an unbelievable time. Those guys are fantastic. Really everybody they hire, but Logan and Brennan specifically are amazing. And again, to make another long story short, it didn't work out at the time. I stayed with Kids of the Game for another 2 years, and then they always joked, because I always joked with them too. I said, hey, look, like my clock is running out on New York City. My wife is from Columbus. I can only convince her to renew our lease a couple more years. Like my runway's running out. I was like, are you sure you want me to like launch this thing and then leave? And so again, long story short, like we were going to do it. It didn't work out for whatever, but they always joked, like as soon as you move to Columbus, we're launching it. And lo and behold, I moved out here in October. I knew we were going to move out here a couple months before then, and called them and said, all right, like, here we go, let's do it. And that was it. And so we launched Pro Skills Basketball Columbus technically in October, but our programming started in March. And here we are. So it's been a fun ride.
So what does it look like trying to build a youth basketball organization? I'm not completely from scratch, obviously, because Pro Skills has a lot of things in place to help you to be able to be successful. But still, you have to go out and hit the pavement and get people to be aware of what Pro Skills is, because it's a new thing in a new city. And the state of Ohio, I can speak for the Cleveland area, and I'm sure Columbus is no different. There's so many different organizations that are out there. It seems like everybody hangs out a shingle and has an AAU club, whether they have 30 teams or they have 2 teams. And so how did you go about just getting things started? What was the process for making people aware of what you were doing and trying to get kids in the door?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, it's been a challenge. I'm from the East Coast. That's where most of my connections were. So like me going from Atlanta to New York, I already knew a ton of people in New York that were able to help. So it was actually much easier for me to do this in New York City, just due to the connections that I had, and just the nature of what I was doing. Like that was my full-time job, was to grow a youth sports organization. So I was focused on it from 9 to 9. That's just what I did. Here, I have a full-time job. I do PSB on the side, and I don't know anyone. So honestly, the thing that really helped was me coaching high school at Olentangy Orange, and I got to meet a ton of different coaches, and I really just learned, right? Like it took months for me to learn the landscape. Who are the big players here? Like, who do I need to meet? Where do our players play, right? Like where do our JV kids play? Where do our varsity kids play? And I need to go meet them. And where are the big gyms here in Columbus? And who do I need to talk to? And that's what I love to do. I love meeting people. I love forming partnerships, relationships, and kind of building things. So that comes natural, but it has been a struggle to get our foot in the door with coaches. For whatever reason, the 2 to 3 main clubs down here have done such a phenomenal job of scooping up all the middle school and high school coaches, and then they coach for that particular AAU program. So many coaches that I talked to right in the early days were like, oh yeah, man, like best of luck, let me know I can help, but I coach for blah, 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 and I coach for here. Right. And it was like, man, like, okay, like we're going to have to go back to the drawing board a little bit here. So, we started off slow. We have one 8th grade team. We have 2 coaches, and, it's been going well, but I was just surprised in terms of in New York City, like you walk out, like to your point, like you walk outside, you blow a whistle and there's like 10 people who want to coach for you. Here, it's just much different. It's a little bit smaller, obviously. There are a lot of organizations, but I would say the organizations have more of like a stranglehold, where like in New York City, there's more, but there's also more kids, there's more opportunity,
Right, for sure.
So it's just a little different, but yeah.
I think that's really, when you look at what the biggest challenges are in terms of trying to build something, you're right that I don't know, for whatever reason, state of Ohio, Cleveland area, Columbus area, I just think that there is organizations that have huge teams. And then what you find too with that is that parents are like, well, this organization has X number of teams. And so just by default, they kind of have good players. And so now if I have a good player, well, I want my good player to play with other good players. And I want them to get into these tournaments. It's a very interesting world. I kind of laugh when you said that, you got to, with college coaching, you got to leave behind some of the silliness. I was going to ask you haven't been to an AAU tournament to see some of the,
that's a different level of,
that's a whole nother definition of silliness, but it's just, again, it's an interesting, the AAU world is an interesting one. I think that's one of the things that I really like about what Pro Skills is trying to do is it's not just about throwing together an AAU team. It really is about coaching. It really is about development and their year-round model and incorporating camps and training into what they do. I think it's a really great model. It's just like anything else in the basketball world that people have to be made aware and they have to be educated. And as you said, it's really a full-time job in all honesty.
Yeah, for sure. I would say too about PSB, what I love the most about it, and besides like even the mission statement where we're like, yes, we want to change the culture of youth basketball, but everyone that works there drops the ego. I honestly think the ego is like the root of almost every problem we have across the board. Name an industry, politics, everything stems down to ego. And you will never hear a PSB coach or administrator or anyone say, yeah, that's my kid. That's out, and that's just one example, right? Like that is everywhere in youth basketball. Like, I trained him. That's my player. That's my height. It's like, no, that's not the freaking point, man, at all. I don't care at all whether the kid is mine or yours. How can I help? How can we help? Can we help him? Let me know. What does he need? What does she need? Like, that is drilled into whoever they hire, and Brennan and Logan has made that like paramount. Like, from all the way to, we run Steph Curry's AAU teams. Like, those guys, like, it's not about that. It's about helping and truly buying into, okay, we cannot change the culture from like the top down, so we need to change the culture from the bottom up. And how are we going to do that? By hiring really, really good people who don't give a damn about getting credit for anything. It's just, you're in it for the right reasons. You love coaching basketball and helping people, period. Hard stop.
All right, so that's maybe one thing that you would change about the youth basketball space. Is there something else that jumps to mind when you think about your experiences and you look at the landscape in total? What's something that if you could just take and wave your magic wand, what's something that you would change about our current youth basketball system that you could make better?
Oh man, I may get in trouble for this, but I think I have a lot of dreams, but I would say one of my dream jobs is to be like the czar of youth basketball and to actually create standards, qualifications, guidelines, and rules around it. Right now, we have massive organizations and brands, the NBA, USA Basketball, that put out good content and mean well, but they, and I don't even think they can, so I'm not faulting them, but like, there's no enforcement. So
right.
I would try my absolute best. This would be impossible almost to do nationally. You would need hundreds of millions of dollars and resources and people, but to actually enforce like strong, like just like high school does, if we can do it at the high school level, we can do it at the AAU level, guidelines around it and all the way down to the nitty gritty of like, hey, like if you join one team, you can't just play for 9 teams in 1 year, like that always bothers me, like the jersey.
Show up on a different team, show up on a different team every weekend. Yeah, my team this year.
Yeah.
With my son's team, we're like, hey, I just saw this kid last weekend on a different team.
Exactly. Like nitty gritty details like that. I from a high level, I would just like to create that, whatever it is, from people from the junior NBA or pro skill, like whatever. That I would love to create a true, like, call it governing body or new organization, whatever it is, or maybe what actual AAU was supposed to do when they were created 30 years ago or whatever it was. Like, let's have them do it. But I would try and create something like that brought like organization to it. And then from like a grassroots level, I just wish we talked to each other more. It has become a what's the right way to put it? Like a ground game where it's like scooping up as many like kids and parents as you possibly can to come play for us, which is fine. I understand that. I'm in it. Like, that's the business of youth sports. But I wish we talked to other organizations more. And again, I'm new here, so maybe people in Columbus do, and I'm just not a part of it yet. But in New York City, it was like hit or miss. I just wish, like, even the big dogs in New York City, right? Like the Wrens and Riverside and whatever, like they do some of it, but I always wish that like there were like meetings once a month or something that we're just getting together, like, hey, like what's going on with you, or what can we fix, or what do we think about doing an event, or just something more communication amongst the million of youth sports organizations. I think that's huge. Like, we see each other at some conferences, maybe we go to a professional development, but like other than that, everyone's just kind of in their own lane, operating, like doing whatever they want. So those would be the two things I would love to fix.
Yeah, it's super territorial.
Yes.
I think that's that's a really interesting way to think about it. Is just people, as you said, they scoop up coaches, they scoop up players, they scoop up families, and everybody kind of want to protect. They want to protect what they have, which is, again, understandable from a business perspective. If somebody's paying your organization and not paying mine, that's one notch down for my business. But I do think, to your point, that we could do a better job of at least collaborating, talking, whether it's sharing best practices, just combining resources to be able to have better tournaments and just those kinds of things. I think are things that are doable. But the problem is, again, I think there's just everybody has sort of their little fiefdom, and they're happy to kind of stay in there as long as their business is moving along and going in the right direction. And again, like I said, it's understandable because there is that business side of it, but you wish for the good of the game and for the good of the kids and the families that are part of it that there could be a better system. But it would, as you said, it would take a lot of resources. It would take a lot of manpower to be able to do that. And I don't know if we'll ever get there, but nonetheless, let's wrap up. I want to give you an opportunity again to share where people can go to get registered for the clinic, share how they can reach out to you, how they can find out more about PSB Columbus. Just give us all the social media, all the information that you can about how we can connect with you and get signed up for the clinic, and then I'll jump back in and wrap things up.
Cool. Sounds good. Yeah. So we're hosting a clinic down here in Columbus, August 29th. You can go to proskillsbasketball.com and get information about it there. You can go to our Instagram, PSB Columbus, or you can email me, Paul, Paul, at proskillsbasketball.com. And we can get you registered that way.
Terrific. Paul, cannot thank you enough for jumping on the Hoop Heads pod with us. If you haven't had a chance to listen to Paul's podcast, The Green Light, which they touch on a lot of different basketball subjects, mainly focused on college basketball, him and his partner Ian, make sure you go ahead and listen to that, check that out. And to everyone out there, thanks for listening, and we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.